Today is the birthday of the great trumpeter Clifford Brown, and we just
Blast off. Hello and welcome. Now I plan to spend today and probably Monday, part of Monday anyway, talking about another aspect of writing that is suggested to me by Barry here in the audience as a good idea. Talk about the refereeing process. Now a lot of you will be asked to write referee reports, and also you'll be receiving referee reports and so on, and so this is an important part of publication. Let's see, first of all, to finish some old business. Oh yeah, homework. Remember, today was the day that homework is due, and so be sure to turn in your homework to the TAs, and they will grade it and give you and we'll be talking about the sequel to the homework assignment next week as we find out what you did. We'll look at and see if there's any specific things to point out, good and bad, about the solutions to the problem. Okay, now I mentioned the other day the paper that I did recently for the Math Monthly, and since we were talking about monthly lately, and this is the one where I had some correspondence with editor, and I ran across this as I was working on my thing for the on refereeing. And so I think Helmush was is a great editor, and so here's a paragraph in here. It says. Let's see. One possible change the referee refers to, and I would like to second, is in the title of the paper and of its sections. Jokes are dangerous in a magazine like the Monthly and the Prophet. From the ingenious double meanings may turn out to be majorized by the loss. Now, you realize that when you're writing to mathematicians, you would use language like this, and it would be more. He would write a different letter to somebody else. But I mentioned that when I wrote the original paper, I got carried away. And I had to show you how carried away. I have to show somebody how carried away I was. Here's the letter. I understand that some people keep their copies of the Monthly in the bathroom. This paper is written especially for them. So the second section was called an absorbing barrier, and the third section was called residues, and the fourth section was a process of elimination, the outcome, and cleaning up. So now what? And then the third reference that was Flushed with Pride, which is a wonderful book I would recommend to anybody. It's the history of Thomas Crapper, the inventor of the flush toilet, and there's a lot of interesting background on that. I don't want to get into it, but anyway, you see, I got carried away. On the other, so then he sent me this fatherly advice, and I wrote back. Okay, and I got a referee report in here too, I guess, and so the actual paper, when it came out, the titles are called Recurrence Relations, The Limiting Behavior, Special Power Series. There's nothing, I believe, anymore left of this. But the title is there, you see. Now, and that's and so I wrote to him about the title because let's see, what is the answer? What is my goodness, here his letter comes back. Your toilet paper is accepted. Oh, well. Okay, where is it? I'm sorry, I must have the letter that I wrote to him about it, but basically, and I hate to use the word basically, I said that I thought about the title, and it seemed to me all right because I had given 2 talks under this title. We used it in the. Here we go. This is my letter. Oh, okay. I submitted the paper on November 4th, and I got back his letter and a referee report on November 30th. That was incredible. And then I said, I made the change, except for one thing, the title is still the same. I've already given 2 lectures on the toilet paper problem. One was at IBM. A story about it has gone into our campus newspaper. The problem was used in a qualifying exam in our department. I discussed it with numerous friends in all walks of life. I mean, at my church, I talked about it to people in conversation and stuff, and I met people who told me they've often wondered about this problem, which is about the sizes of when you have 2 rolls of toilet paper to choose from, what can you predict about it and things like this. And so anyway, I'm confident that there won't be an unfortunate backlash, except perhaps if Senator Proxmire gets wind of the NSF support. The subject isn't really raunchy like Harari's pornograph, which he so I said, now I have dispensed with my double meanings and all this, and actually Helmush and I had a conversation where he was where he had been surprised that my expletives were different from Nixon's, and now our roles are reversed, and you are wisely telling me to clean up my act, and yeah. But now, since then, I have felt a lot of twinges of that I should have changed the title of the paper, because every time I see this sitting in my pile of reprints or something, it looks very strange, and so I'm not sure I made the right decision on the title actually. But it got attention and it was reviewed in, it had reasonable reviews in the. I haven't looked it up in the Russian reviewing journal. That'll be fun to do, I think, to see that. But the mathematics was actually worthwhile, and I didn't think that I would have this negative reaction afterwards seeing it. But just somehow it's very much out of context, and that is disturbing. No matter how logical or illogical something is, things can be disturbed. The fact that they are that different is a factor that I probably should have taken account of. Now let's see, refereeing. There's some literature about refereeing, but and I suppose it's gone on and on. Like this comes from Science Magazine, 1965, and it was sent to me when I first became, or about the first year that I was in the editorial game, and this is something that I think ACM passed out to its editors as something that they might want to take to heart, well, I didn't. But I don't care for the. I didn't think this was a great paper, but had some points in it that I should mention, because this addressed the traditional view of refereeing, and I think there's more to it than what he has. But he thinks of refereeing as more of a game where there's legal rights and responsibilities and he's not really thinking of it as part of a world enterprise of advancing science so much as advancing people's careers and things like that. That's not the primary reason for publication. The primary reason for publication is because you want to publish something that you think is that you want people to know, that you think is worth their time and knowing, and because it's another little stone in the edifice of science, and all these nice things. But really, this is one thing that probably distinguishes people from animals. But the most is that we can remember and we can build on the past, because we have written communication, and each little piece of work is small in itself, but put a lot of these together, and this is really what makes a difference over the years. And you feel you have that. That's I think the right reason to publish. But now, anyway, there's something that I have to remember then, that the first duty of the referee is to the editor. The editor is sending out a paper to a referee for judgment, and the referee is an expert in this area. And so, as serving as an expert witness would be in a legal case, and saying, yes, in my opinion, I think this is worth or not worth publishing. And there's that aspect of it. But I don't. To me, that's not the main thing, and I'll talk more about that later. But here's another point that definitely that the referee. Whenever the referee decides about that something is well known, there's a duty to not to just say this is a known result, but you also want to cite chapter and verse why this thing is already in the literature, so there doesn't seem to be a reason for it to be not known. Now. And of course, the editor is asking the referee to do this, so that the editor can now make an informed judgment, and the editor has to write back to the author saying, yes, your paper should or should not be published. And the main problem in all of this is that the people who are publishing for the wrong reasons are the ones that are going to take most of the editor's time and the referee's time, because they will be writing something that doesn't really deserve to be published, but they won't believe that it doesn't deserve to be published, and you have to prove it to them. You take a long time spending a lot of hours for somebody where you would rather put that many hours into somebody who was going to write write better papers and really make more of a contribution to literature. But what happens is that instead you spend many hours agonizing over how you're going to prove to somebody that this is trash and not to bother us again, but do it in a nice way. Herb mentioned Fermat's last theorem being proved. I read a proof of Fermat's last theorem in April, but the guy sent me also a proof of Riemann hypothesis, which I declined to read. And so anyway, then the author writes back to the editor saying, well, the referee said such and such, but I I have a counter argument that really the referee doesn't know what he's talking about, and so on and so on. And this can take an unfortunate amount of time. It doesn't. Fortunately, this doesn't happen often enough to really bog down the whole enterprise of science, which it could very well do. But I think the main thing referees should try to do is consider a responsibility to the author, and not the primary and the readers of the publication, but not only to the editor. And if you have a certain number of hours to spend on contributing to your profession, there's a trade-off in how you're going to how many hours are you going to put into the various aspects of things. And one of the decisions that I reluctantly made, but I think it was necessary in computer science, was that I decided that I would put much more time into refereeing and editing papers before they were published than reviewing papers after they were published. Now, I mean, there's review journals that need people to write reviews, but I decided that I would put my time into getting the things better before they had to be reviewed instead of afterwards. And because computer science was such a new field, standards had not at that time developed to the point yet where given the very few people who could be good referees, very few people who could be good reviewers, it seemed to me we would put more of the people into refereeing, and then we didn't have very many good reviewers left after publication. Now it's a more mature field, and I think it's better to a more balanced situation is happening. But put an awful lot of time into refereeing because of the idea was to make the literature as good as possible when it finally gets in print. This should not be just a half-baked thing. Okay, so I made up a list in the 60s a little handout called Hints to Referees, and this I searched high and low for many hours yesterday trying to find that, because I must have sent out thousands of these over the years, and we used to send out many every week because I had so many papers going in and out. And every time I would send this to the referee, and it was a fairly good presentation of the philosophy that I've felt strongly about refereeing. They've all vanished, but all I found was a trace of it in this in a letter from 1970 saying. There's an information sheet with hints for referees, which we think every editor should take to heart, and which we consequently enclose a copy. But we didn't save the copy because we already had all this. It's one of these things I had so many of. So I know all the people who got this letter, and I sent to them and asked them for if any of them saved the enclosure that came with the letter, and maybe one of them is a pack rat and has this. So maybe by the end of the quarter I can show you what this is, because I thought I said it well, but maybe I'll try to remember what I said in this Hints to Referees so many years later. As I said, one of the responsibilities is to the readers of a publication. We would like to, if possible, that when a paper comes out in a journal, it would be worth reading before and not. Not just publish everything that comes along and then let some kind of law of evolution decide and selection take place after that point. Ideally, we'd like to have things that people would, all the papers would be worthwhile in a journal. Now, why not? So I disagree a bit with one of the things Herb said on Wednesday, that he would tolerate more lapses in a paper for the Journal of Algorithms than in a paper for the monthly. I don't see why you have to tolerate that particularly. You should still ask the author to do better. And so one of the points I made for my hints to referees was that almost never should a paper be accepted as it was submitted. There's always, an author can always do better, and only once in my whole in my memories was there a paper submitted to me that I was not able to think of a single way to improve it, and I published it exactly as it was. There was a paper by George Collins in the ACM Journal. And he had just optimized that as he wrote it. I mean, his style wasn't mine, but it was for his style. It was just perfect, and there was nothing to do. But almost always, I suggested that there was some way in which you could ask for a minor revision before publication, where the author would do it. And I also believe the author appreciates this, even though it's a little more work. I've been an author myself, and I've known that I'm very glad to know that somebody has read something that I put time into carefully and has actually has suggestion how it can be made even better. I think this is wonderful. So one of the responsibilities is to the publication. Let's get the publication so that we can be proud of our whole field. The publications look good. This was definitely not true in the early '60s. There's all kinds of flaky stuff getting in print, and you had let's see, is it 4 possibilities or 3? You can get the right results with the wrong proof. You can get the wrong results with the right proof. No, that's the other one. You can get the wrong results with the wrong proof, and you can get the right results with the right proof. About 30% in each category. 10% you can't figure out whether there's no results at all or something. Anyway. So it's really necessary to put a lot of time into making standard. Now, if you look at a random math journal from 1930s or 1920s or something like that, I think it's surprising how that you'll recognize the authors of almost every paper, and you'll also recognize the results of many of those papers. That is, they've come down into textbooks. Almost, more than half of the papers in a journal will be something really polished and well known and significant. Now, would that be true of a random journal of the '70s? No way. So I think people got to be more tolerant of poor quality. Now, the other thing is that I stressed in my hints to referees was to be in the role of teacher. That is, the person who's the author of this paper that you're refereeing is going to write other papers and is learning as everyone goes through life and learns more. And you can and a referee is typically anonymous, and the author never finds out who it is. This is so that the referee is able to make critical comments without making enemies, essentially. And so, but when you have this cloak of anonymity, a lot of people will write something that's really tasteless and will tear down the author in such a way that is completely. The author will get this and just be angry and absolutely learn nothing from the experience. And so there's a way to give constructive criticism, and this is and how to point out ways to make improvements in something that, so that it's clear to the author that he can do better, is clear, but also how he can do better in the next time he writes a paper, and so on. And so there's a way of doing this in a way that you would do to a student, saying keep trying. Here's a way to improve, and so on. But this aspect of it, these more human weren't brought out in this article. I was disappointed not to see that. Now, the referee also will contribute to the technical quality sometimes by, certainly you want to contribute references to work of which the author was unaware, and you want to check and say that your proof of Theorem 2 is false and so on. It's nice if you can actually supply a correct proof of Theorem 2. That's not necessary, but there are quite a few times that I got sufficiently interested in a problem that I decided that I would contribute a result to the paper as a referee, and include that in the referee comments. And so I must say there are several dozen people who don't know who I was, but that have, there's a note in their paper saying thanks to the referee for theorems 1, 2, and 3. Essentially, not quite, but it's for improving the comments, and that made me feel good that I was somehow that this journal was getting better papers, and only I knew that somebody appreciated this, and it was improving the quality of the publication, and somehow making the image of the journal as a more infallible thing to do. That was somehow I was pleased to have that kind of a role. And I've seen that in many of the other referees, and it was later as an editor. And in my own papers, as I'll show you, there's many cases where I owe a lot to referees. So I kind of like this idea of thinking of a journal as a source of wisdom by anonymous referees, and this kind of cooperation aspect of it, rather than a legal approach of what are rights of the different plaintiffs and participants in this thing. That's a completely distorted view of the scientific publication process in my opinion. Now, let's see what I was going to say. When you submit a paper, what journal do you submit to? A lot of people ask, students will have results, and they say, and the answer typically is the one that has the best referees for the subject of your paper. Unless you just want to get it published. Then if you just wanted to get it published, you would send to a journal that would likely have a very lightweight, a referee who wouldn't know if this is already a known result. You can look at the editorial board, or if it's a sequel to some other paper that's already been published in a particular journal, then you know that this journal has people who have refereed this kind of stuff before. And what you want to know, I think, if you're a conscientious author, is you want to know if you have really made a contribution. And so you want to send to the place that will tell you, quite frankly, if it isn't, and be able to judge your work. You want to get that kind of confirmation. You don't want to leave that as an unknown. So that's the choice. Try to find a journal that has the best chance of having giving you a good service of refereeing. Yeah, Tracy.
Some journals have letters in them that look very much like very small papers. Are they refereed the same way that they?
Sometimes they are. Yeah, that's just their way of separating long papers from short papers. Now there are some journals that have no refereeing, and there's conference proceedings that have various different levels of refereeing and things like this, and readers generally expect that they have to wade through a lot of trash when they look at that stuff. And if somebody, I mean, Al Perlis, there were proposals for ACM to publish an unrefereed journal. It's been coming up ever since the middle 60s, maybe even earlier. And Perlis compared this to attaching a hose to somebody's mouth and letting anything gush out that they wanted. It was just going to, much better to have a filter system. No filter system is perfect. People get elected president of the United States and so on. It's a hard job. Campaigning goes on for years, but is this really the filter system? Does it really do? But it's still better to apply controls before publication and after. Much better, I say. Now I have. Speaking of president of the United States, when people run for president, their past life is brought under very careful scrutiny, and I decided to fess up to something now that I did in the '60s that I've never told anybody before, and I'm not sure I should tell now, but I've started it, but in case I ever run for president, it was going to come out anyway, and so somebody would discover this, and so I would have to. So now I have to do it. So, and that is, I began editor. In 1965, I was editing programming languages for both the Communication of the ACM and the Journal of the ACM, and I began this just at the end of 64, beginning of 65, and I decided that I didn't really know how to trust. I had a whole bunch of possible referees, but I didn't have any idea if they would be very good referees or not. And so I decided to send the same paper to about 12 people to get referee reports on. Meanwhile, I had already refereed the paper myself rather carefully so that I knew what the paper was, and I had already communicated with the author that the paper needed major revision and so on. But then I sent out. So here's a letter I sent to the author on January 5th, and said essentially. What is it? Your paper has been referred to me since I've just accepted position of programming language editor. We cannot publish this paper before major revisions are made since the important sections are so unclear. The close review gives one man's impressions and suggestions and so on. If I had not assigned the paper to him, he would probably have not taken as much time as he did in trying to understand it. So you see, hardly any of our readers would get much out of the paper in its present form. And I had written this letter. Then on January 11th, I sent a letter to 7 people, and I sent this same paper out to quite a few other people later on, and I always, noted the date in which I sent them the paper and how long it took to get the report back to me. But this was I guess I didn't lie. I mean, I said, I hope you can serve as referee for this paper. I didn't. I just didn't go on and tell them that their report was going to be just for my own calibration purposes. But anyway, that's what I did, and I didn't feel too guilty about it because the paper actually, even though very badly written, was interesting as an algorithm, and so although they'd be putting some time on it, they probably wanted to know about this algorithm anyway, or at least it wasn't a total loss on their part to be spending this time on the thing. It was a bit interesting. Okay. Well, so now. So I don't know which referee report I had for this that I sent back. Another thing that I did once or twice was write 2 referee reports. One was the one that I submitted anonymously as if it had come into me as the editor, and then I would write another letter saying, I think the referee was a bit too blunt in his remarks and should have toned down a little bit here and apologize for this and all this, but basically these things had to be said, and so sometimes I ghost wrote a referee report and then changed it a little bit in the letter to try to make the thing. As far as I can see, it was the best way to get the proper encouragement of the the proper training for the person, and still not make him feel too bad, but let him know the facts. I always try to have the right outcome, and it's not just the end justify the means. I think it was a way of doing something with now this particular. So here's a paper. Then I have many referee reports on, and it turned out that I liked a surprising number of the referee reports that I got back in. But here the notation was horrible and not explained, and there were errors of fact and so on. So there's a bunch of numbered comments made. Okay, so then I got back. One of this report says, I believe the article deserves publication after revision by the author and re-review. So that's basically the same judgment that I had. That is, it's got to have so much revision that then another referee report has to be made again here. And so commenting again on numerous points about that weren't clear, and advice on how to improve it and make it clear, and how to do it. So that was a 10 points made on the paper. Pretty good. Here's another review that came by. It said a paper on the subject indicated by the given title should include 1, a complete, precise, concise algorithm describing the method of analysis. 2, a proof, or at least a convincing explanation. 3, a statement describing the limitations inherent. Now, this paper had none of these in any way. It doesn't satisfy any of these, so I do not recommend its publication. So he doesn't even encourage a rewrite of the paper. Oh yeah, here he says, so, I would encourage the author to rewrite the paper with the above guidelines in mind, and then try again. I think this was Klaus Wirtz, Nicholas Wirtz. Review. Then here's another one which said, there may be a little that is new here, but is embedded in a network of rediscoveries. There's a large body of published material and supplies bibliography, many papers to read. In this, I recommend the author study the following bibliography in roughly the order given, and then and so a list of 7 papers, essentially saying that this man is such a novice in the field he doesn't know enough to write yet, and he should read these things and then come back. Carefully worked out bibliography, but that person's judgment was that the method was really not worthy of publication until it had been sorted out. Here's another one. I find this paper very interesting, certainly worth publishing. In particular, it appears to offer significant advantages over other published algorithms. Now, this is interesting because this particular reviewer was the one that I had referred to in my report to the author, and said that I thought that that it was almost equivalent to the algorithm described in the paper. So I had erred in that regard, but because the actual author of the Ned Irons, who I thought had already discovered most of the stuff, was rather impressed by this. Ned is a guy who also doesn't know that different. Nothing phases him. Everything is cryptic. It's something that looks very cryptic to me. It always looks like an open book to him. Did you know Ned? Was he at? Yeah. Okay. So, yes. Okay. What? Oh yeah. So he actually sees this as well, he's been working with. Now I realize he's been working with Seymour Cray's machines, which are sort of designed for this algorithm anyway. When he writes this, but anyway, this was. So he has suggestions. So he says it is not. I feel the presentation is not as clear as it should be, and I've indicated an additional copy where changes might be made. And so he marked up the paper. This you do if it's the most convenient way to communicate with the author. You just take the manuscript and say, I know you're going to have to rewrite this anyway, so I actually wrote on it my remarks. And that's sometimes you do that, sometimes you don't, depending on how many changes there are. But so then he had also specific remarks that would improve. So I consider this was a good review also. Here's one. What? Yeah, it's coming along. But I started out with some people who I thought would do reasonably good. I was mostly, here I got back February 1, not too bad. It's incredibly poorly written. Now, the transformation can now rather loosely be written such and such, and the author's even apologizing for saying that he's not going to try to explain something except to make it loose and all this. So anyway, and there's some technical problems here. Here was another nice one. This was Peter Wegner's review. I think this paper should be regarded as expository rather than a research paper, since it's concerned almost exclusively with description and application of somebody else's algorithm, which deserves to be more widely known. Publication recommended provided the author prepared to rewrite it in more rigorous fashion, and then he has many pages of general comments on how it could be improved. And in fact, then he goes numbered points, 1 to 20. And so a lot of good thought went into that. This one here is okay. I don't know. This one was this was one that I didn't like because it didn't really ask for very much, and it was not a. If only these suggestions had been followed, then we would have published a pretty lousy paper that nobody would get much out of. So compared to the other referee reports, this one doesn't go very much in it. And here's one that says, this paper cannot be read, it has to be solved like a puzzle. Comments principally involve these things here, and then a very useful, here's what you sometimes have to do and suggest that the author rewrite the paper, have it reviewed locally by someone unfamiliar with the algorithm, and then resubmit. In other words, sometimes you have to say, before you go to the refereeing process, make sure that at least somebody else in your environment can understand it. All right. This paper is written so unclearly it can't be read with appreciable comprehension. At best, the reader must construct for himself a parsing that is not inconsistent with the few clues supplied. And yes, and then it does, and then it has a relevant reference to an algorithm by Martin Kay, which was in fact quite useful for there. What's this now? But I did have one that recommended publication. I guess this was in the cover letter. So this guy had only minor suggestions. Oh, did I lose the? Oh no, that's okay. So he gives references to another paper by Ingerman, which is relevant. So anyway, this was all. Now the funny thing happened though. I got this letter 2 years later. From the editor-in-chief. He says, I refer to a paper by so-and-so. This paper was originally received and turned over to me when I became, is this 65? It should be 64. These dates are all off by a year, aren't they? When did I do? No. Yeah, these dates are all off by a year. But anyway, apparently this paper has been circulated privately to a number of people, and I have some reports which say that it contains a lucid explanation of bottom-to-top syntactic analysis. I wonder if you might be in a position to give me the latest report and your opinion as to whether you believe we should rescue the paper from oblivion and so on. So anyway, the algorithm became known, although the author never did write it. So at least by my sending it out to all these referees, it got the algorithm, which in other words, this guy hadn't invented a new algorithm. He was trying to write an exposition, quote unquote, of somebody else's algorithm, which now at least got exposed by the fact that the referees knew about it. But he never did. And he did publish this particular author, I believe, published one paper on Fortran, and then, but I don't know what happened to him since. Now, I would have been happier to conclude the story by saying that this author went on to become one of the great, authors of computer science. This has happened in one case. That there was that I wrote a very long referee report to. I won't tell this person's name, but I really ripped up a paper that needed to be this, and I wrote a long report, and I thought I'd never, this guy would never, say hi Don to me ever again. And I got back a letter from him 2 years later, and he said, this changed my life, and I decided to concentrate on writing, and then he's got books out now. He became a very well respected professor at well-known universities and so on, and he said that this actually was because he got this strong criticism back but did have suggestions as to how to make it better, and so that worked. All right. Now,
question?
Yeah.
Okay, after reviewing a paper for technical content, and if you do feel it's very weak and perhaps not worthy of publication, or at least that's your recommendation,
Yeah.
Would you spend the time to actually go through in terms of corrections in grammar and spelling and maybe perhaps presentation?
Not grammar and spelling, not at that level. Not if that's a major. I would comment on that as I would make a quick note, but I wouldn't make a list. I would just allude to the fact that once you've got these out of play, then really you ought to use Unix spelling checker or whatever.
But then conversely, though, if you do feel that it is worthy in terms of technical content, then you would certainly spend the time.
Then I put more time into getting that extra spit and polish. Yeah, making it even better. That's right. I believe in making the publication as well as good as possible. There's no reason why that's a bad idea that I can think of. Okay, now wanted to show you some of the referee reports I've received recently, just to make this to bring up more issues and make this more clear. So here's the letter I got from Leo this May this year. Leo Gibas, this is ACM Transactions on Graphics. I showed you the galley proofs for this paper on Monday, and he said that. As you can see, the referee reports are mostly quite positive. Well, it's nice of him to say this. I had 3 referee reports. One was very negative, and the other 2 were positive. So mostly they were positive. And so he accepts the paper for publication. Number of revisions are in order as indicated by the referee comment. And so then here are the referee reports. And I got these. Now here he uses a form letter, which some editors will do, and others, like Leslie Lamport and I discussed this. Leslie thinks that these are boring, these forms, but it's sort of a checklist. Is the title appropriate? Is the abstract satisfactory? Are the keywords well chosen? If you don't ask these questions, the referees might not think about these things, and so but it's pretty boring to say, yes, see Section 3, yes, see Section 3, yes, see Section 3. Section 3 is comments. And so it's kind of boring to fill these out, but it goes through the issues that a referee ought to keep in mind. So, would you put it in the research section, or there's another or the practice and experience section? Okay. Is it technically sound? Does it make adequate reference to earlier contributions? No. Okay. And of course, this is why I submitted to ACM Transactions on Graphics. This is a paper subject in which I'd never written before, and I knew that they had the referees who would know what the value of this work was. It seemed interesting to me, but I didn't know if it was rediscovery. Presentation, is it well organized? Does it have excess material? Does it lack material? Yes, reference to earlier work. Is it clear? Yes. Satisfactory. Are more or fewer figures necessary? It's okay. Recommendation, then you have a different accept as is with minor revisions, reconsider after major changes, or reject, and then there's another one called submit to. Now this is, unfortunately, after you check reject, the author will submit to something else anyway. I mean, if there's enough journals around, somebody will finally, it'll finally filter down to the one that has the standards of the paper. That's a shame. I guess that's not always true, but this fact of life that you have to realize that some journals will are more like what does Dijkstra call them, write-only journals. Okay. Well, now we're running short of time, so but I want to mention that these comments here were both kinds. Every once in a while, they made me feel good by saying that they actually enjoyed part of it, and it was nice to mix that in with the criticism. It's always good to have something nice to say, even though your basic message is you ought to work a lot harder. It's just like guiding a student, it's. I mean, this is not extremely original. I've seen very similar attempts, both published and unpublished. I think it should be published in order to save others from reinventing the concept. I mean, that's not exactly what I wanted to hear, Okay. And so then excellent references are given, unfortunately, the references were excellent except in one respect. They didn't give the clues. The SPIE, I didn't know what that was, and then I found it finally through a bunch of hard work. And they never had page numbers on these things, on these references, so it wasn't possible to use. Here's a reference to a PhD thesis or a master's thesis, who knows which, or how to get a hold of it. That was the first report. The next one. It should be published. Before publication, some minor errors need to be corrected, some additional changes are recommended, and so on. And then it comments on technical things. Actually, I had a technical error that really, this referee caught, and I thought it was correct, and I went to program it on the computer even to check, and finally, it took me half an hour to figure out that in fact I was wrong. There was something subtle going on there, needed to be explained, but I thought I had something obvious, and it was absolutely wrong. And then more references here, completely disjoint, by the way, from the references supplied by the previous referee. So anyway, and then I had the third referee report, which says. I took the examples, hung them on a wall, had several people comment on them from a distance of 15 feet. It was recommended. Uniformly, all preferred my method to last, and all this. And I find very little to recommend the technique in practice, and there might be something of theoretical interest, but not for paper and all this. And so this puts it in very good perspective. So this is again a comment from a reader who is motivated. So there will be people. So I know that if I had published the paper as it was there would be a lot of people who had this same reaction. Very important for me to have this kind of feedback. But especially it was important to have those references in the other ones. And I got copies of the references. I looked through the references, and that led me to another idea. And in other words, there were new ideas in those references that could be combined with the idea that I had. And lead to a brand new method that it brought the whole thing in sharper focus for me, and it was then possible to come up with something that I think is a real contribution to literature, because now I knew from this referee report what the state of the art was. I could write a paper that would be consistent with being famous. People, like Herb said, some people there's a paper in this. ACM transactions on graphics by Knuth. Well, you expect that there's a certain level of quality in there, and now I've got to live up to this. And now I felt that I could, because of these referee reports and because of the variety. So I knew that Leo had chosen the people who would really be reflective of the audience, and this was a big help to me. What?
Did the referees know who the
Yeah, they knew. And so at the end of the paper, then I had an acknowledgement. Now, the referees were extremely helpful, pointing me to literature, which I was unaware this led to substantial improvement of the methods and the exposition in this paper, which is absolutely true. So that's an example of refereeing at its best, it seems to me, and it's recent from my experience. So I really appreciated all three of the referee reports. They were quite honest and helpful. Okay.